We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Aleph Amid Beis in Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 41b. This Daf is sponsored by Shalom ben Noim in memory of Moshe Leo ben David. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amid or a Daf, see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amid, the Gemara brought a Brisa, and the Brisa said that everybody agrees one can take tzitzis from one garment and then put it on to a different garment. And the Brisa now concludes, Uvilvad shalote mufsekes, as long as those strings that you're taking from one garment are not cut, as long as they're whole, you can move them to another garment. But the Gemara continues and asks on that, Shamat mina, should we derive from here, matirin mi beged lebeged, that we can untie from one garment and put tzitzis onto another garment? Is that really the case? And the Gemara says it's not necessarily a proof from this brisa, because dilma di ibaloi, maybe in this brisa, we're talking about where the original garment is worn out. And so if the original garment is not really usable, that's what it's saying. You can now move the tzitzis from one garment to the next. And Rashi explains, Uvilvad shalote mufsekes, as long as the strings are not cut, she'e kol chutei shleim, and again, all the strings have to be whole. Shema mina matir mi beged lebeged, the Gemara said, should we learn from here that you can untie from one garment and put the strings on another? That's going to be a machlokas coming up. And the Gemara said, Dilma ibaloi, maybe this is only talking about where they're worn out. Hadakatani, shemevi tchelas mi makom acher, when it says over here you can bring the tchelas from a different garment, v'toleba, and then hang it on this garment, v'lo cheshinan lebizoyin, and we're not concerned with disgracing the original, to mevazelo talis rishona, that you're disgracing the original talis. The nizbal, it's talking about where it's worn out. De'ein ru'uyel tzitzis, it's not fit for tzitzis kamer. That's what we're talking about. To matir mimena tzitzis. Then in that case, one is able to untie the tzitzis. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught on a brisa, talis shakula tchelas, if you have a talis, a garment that's entirely tchelas, it's entirely blue wool, kol minei tzivonin potrin ba, all kinds of colors can be used for the tzitzis to exempt that talis, chutz mikol ilan, except for threads that are colored blue with indigo. And we will take a look at Rashi's second explanation of this Gemara, Lishna Achrin, another way of understanding Ve'ikr, and this is the main understanding of the Gemara. Chutz mi kol ilan, with the exception of kol ilan. Why is kol ilan a problem? Because the main thing that we're concerned about is two colors. In other words, normally you'd have a white garment. If you have a white garment, so then you have to have tzitzis of two colors, white, which matches the color of the garment, and then you also have the blue, you have the tchelas. But in this situation, where the garment is entirely tchelas, so you can't have all the threads be blue, you can't have it matching the garment, because then everything's going to be tchelas, everything's going to be blue. You have to have two different colors, vielu mare and shavan. Again, if you're going to have indigo, it's all going to be blue, it's going to be problematic, and so therefore anything is acceptable, any color is acceptable for the white threads. They don't specifically have to be white, except you shouldn't use indigo, because then you're going to end up with all blue threads. And the Gemara continues, Meisve, we have a question on this from a Brisa. The word Meisve over here is slightly inaccurate because we're asking on it one Brisa from another Brisa. Usually you'd have a term like Uraminu, we have a contradiction from a second Brisa, but in any case we have a contradiction from the following Brisa. Talis, with regards to a talis, ein poter ba elamina, when it comes to the tzitzis, you have to have the tzitzis have to be of the same kind of the garment. And so therefore, talis shakula tcheles, let's say you have a garment that's entirely tcheles, again like the Brisa above, so maybe tcheles, so he has threads of tchelas, and then he has another thread. He has threads which are similar to the color of the garment. For example, if it's a red garment, you'll bring red threads, and then you'll also have your tchelas threads, v'toleba, and he inserts those kinds of threads. V'kola ilan lo yavi. Now indigo he should not bring as the other thread. V'imhevi kosher, and if he brings indigo, it is still kosher, and that's the contradiction here in this price. It says imhevi kosher. If he brings kola ilan, it is kosher. It just seems to be a derabanan that you shouldn't bring the kola ilan, a gezerah, decree not to do it, but it is kosher, and that goes against the first brisa. And Rashi explains, and we'll go back to the earlier Rashis now. Meisve, we have a question. Talis ein potrin ba, by a talis, we only exempt it with tzitzis of the same kind, l'shem lavan, meaning as the white threads, elamina, it has to be of the same kind as the garment itself. Meaning, im adomahi, let's say the garment is red, yatel ba shnei chutin adomim, so then he should have two strings, two threads that are red, ushnei chutin techelas, and then have two strings that are blue. V'chein shar gevanim, the same would be true if it's other colors. And then if it's a garment that's entirely tcheles, maybe tcheles, so then he brings the tcheles threads. Shnei chutin l'shem tcheles, that's two strings, two threads is tcheles. V'davar acher l'shem lavan, and then he brings something else, that'll be the white threads. V'avagav dehai tcheles have min knaf. Now even though in this case the tcheles threads are actually the same as the corner, the same as the garment, afilu hachi, nevertheless, shnei minim bo'in, and it does need to be two different kinds of strings. It can't be all tcheles. Does linan basa rov talisas, because you have to follow the majority of garments. V'im heavy kosher, but if he does bring the kol ilan, it's kosher. Alma kol ilan nami poter bas. So we see that kol ilan also exempts, is also acceptable, and that's the contradiction to the first brisa. And the Gemara continues and answers the contradiction. Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, "Lo kasha, it's not difficult. Kan betalis bas arba chutin." Here we're talking about a talis that has 4 threads, and kan betalis bas shmona chutin. And here we're talking about a talis that has 8 threads. And for this, again, we will take a look at the second explanation of Rashi. Meisveim hevi kosher talis bas shmona chutin. When we say a talis of 8 strings, it means as follows: Dalid shel tchelas umenacher. First, you have your first 4 strings, the general 4 strings of a talis of tzitzis, and that's tchelas, and then some other kind. Uvikesh lahatel ba'od arba acherim, and now he wants to add another 4 strings, which is generally more than you usually need for tzitzis. So there, lo yatel kol ilan. There, what the Bryce is saying is these additional strings, which are not really necessary for the fulfillment of the mitzvah, so they can be anything, but they shouldn't be kol ilan. They shouldn't be indigo. Why? Shema yimkarenu lishacher. This is a gezerah. Maybe he'll end up selling this garment to someone else. V'yehi savar shem tchelas. He'll think that these blue threads are tchelas. V'yatira mikan. He'll untie them from here. V'yiten betalas acheres, and he'll put them in another talis b'mokom tchelas im lavon, with tchelas together with white. V'im hevi kosher. But if he does bring these, he's kosher. Da niftera ba'arba chut and shel tchelas v'davar acher, because he's already exempted himself anyway with the original 4 strings which have tchelas and the other kind of string. And so again, that's the explanation of the second brisa. Essentially, it's talking about extra strings, but the first brisa is just talking about a regular talis. But the Gemara continues and asks, according to that, shamat mino matir mibeged lebeged. So do we understand from this brisa then that one can untie from one garment to another garment? Because that's the whole concern over here, that he's going to untie the indigo and then use it somewhere else. And the Gemara says to that, Dil Madiyav, and maybe it just means that the person might do that, but it's not something that one is really supposed to do. Rashi explains, Shma mino mi depasal ba, from this disqualification, mishum ha'chishasha, because of this concern. So should we understand the matir mi beged lebeged, you can untie from one beged to another? And the Gemara said to that, Dil Madiyav, and maybe it just means if one does that. Im avar, let's say a person transgresses vitir and unties it, as nafka chorba, then you're going to have a problem. The mishra tzitzis mikol ilan lechude, because then you're going to have a set of tzitzis that are being permitted from indigo alone. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated the following, Machlokas Amoroim, Rav Omar Rav says, Ein matir and mi beged lebeged, one cannot untie tzitzis from one garment to another garment. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, matir and mi beged lebeged, one is allowed to untie from one garment to another garment. And the Gemara continues, Rav Amar Rav says, Ein madlikin mi ner lener, one is not allowed to light from one candle to another candle. This is talking about on Chanukah. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, madlikin mi ner lener, one is allowed to light from one candle to another candle. And Rashi explains, miner lener, again from one candle to another candle, osan de Chanukah. Here we're talking about the candles of Chanukah. And the Gemara continues, Rav Amar Rav says, Ein halacha Rabbi Shimon begreira. The halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon with regards to greira. We'll see that case in a moment. Ushmuel Amar halacha Rabbi Shimon begreira. And Shmuel says that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon by the case of greira. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Kol mili demar, everything that the master did, the master here refers to Rabbah. Rabbah always Ovid Karav, he always followed Rav. Levar mehani tlos, except for these 3 cases, the Ovid Kishmuel. In the following 3 cases, he followed Shmuel, the cases we just had above, and they are again matir mi beged lebeged, we can untie from one garment to another. Umadlikin mi ner lener, we can light from one candle to another. V'halacha Rabbi Shimon begreira, and the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon in the case of greira. And the Gemara now brings the case of greira to Tanya, as we learned in a brisa. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Gorer adam mita kisei v'saf. So a person can drag a bed or a chair or a bench. This is talking about an Shabbos. Uvilvan shelo yeskavin lasos charetz. As long as he doesn't have in mind, he doesn't have intention to create a furrow, a ditch in the ground. As long as his intention is not for the plowing essentially of the ground, he just wants to drag it from one place to another, that is permitted. That essentially is a situation of davar sheino miskavin. It's something that is done without intention. And we will note over here that with regards to the issue of making a choretz, making a furrow, there is a discussion whether that is considered choresh, which is plowing, or whether that is considered bona, which is building. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yehuda Mosar Leila Kitzer, Rav Yehuda, he would give over his garment, his talis, which had tzitzis, he would give it over to the launderer, and he would not be concerned that the strings would break and then they would be replaced with indigo threads. Rav Chanina Avid La Sisa, Rav Chanina, he was concerned, and so he would roll the tzitzis into a ball to ensure that they would not not break. And Ravina chayet l'humechat, Ravina, he would sew the hem, essentially he would sew them into the hem to protect them in order that they would not break. And Rashi explains, Rav Yehuda Mosar Talisoim Hatzitzis, again, Rav Yehuda, he would give his talis together with the tzitzis, Lekitzra to the launderer, Lekoves to the launderer. Velo Chayesh, he was not concerned, Dilma Mintuka Tcheles V'rami Ba Kol Ilan, that maybe the Tcheles string would break, and then the launderer would put in Kol Ilan, he would put in indigo instead. And Rashi continues that Rav Chanina Avid Lahu Sisa, he would roll them in a ball, Kishanosna Lakovis, when he would give it to the launderer, Mekafel Hatzitzis Kimin Pika Shakorim Kadesh Lo Yinatak, he would roll it up so that it doesn't break. And Rashi continues with regards to Ravina Chayet Lahu Mechat, he would sew the hem, Osa Latalis Kimin Safa, he would almost sew a hem that was like a pocket, Umachbi Hachutin Besocha V'tofer HaSafa, and then he would put the strings inside there, and he would stitch that up, and that was a way to protect the threads. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in a brisa, Kama chutin hunosen, how many strings are used for the tzitzis? Beis Shammai omrim dalid, Beis Shammai say 4 strings, Uveis Hillel omrim gimel, Beis Hillel say 3 strings. And the brisa continues, V'kamate meshuleshes, how much should the strings hang down? Beis Shammai omrim dalid, Beis Shammai say 4 etzbos, 4 finger breadths, Uveis Hillel omrim gimel, Beis Hillel say 3 finger breadths. V'gimel she Beis Hillel omrim, and when Beis Hillel say 3 finger breadths, what kind of finger, what size finger are we talking about? We're talking about achas me'arba betefach shaladim. We're talking about the finger, which is 1/4 of a tefach, as we'll see in a moment. That is the thumb, so it's 4 thumb breadths. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Papa says, tefach d'oraisa, the tefach on a d'oraisa level, what does that measure? It's dalid begodel, it's 4 thumb breadths, as we just said. And again, that's why Beis Hillel is saying 3 etzbos. It refers to the kinds of etzbos, which are 1/4 of a tefach, which is the thumb. Another way to measure the tefach is shis bekatan. If you use the smallest finger, it would be 6 of those. And chamesh betilsa, if you use the tilsa, which is literally means the 3rd finger, it's referring to the index finger, so then it would be 5 of the index finger. That measures 1 tefach. And Rashi explains, Arba chutin nasan bechor hatalis v'koflan l'shmon, according to Beis Shammai, 4 strings are placed in the hole of the talis and they're folded over, which then make 8. Mishuleshes teluya hanaf levad min hagdil, besides for the braid, that's what the question of the bris is, how long does it hang aside from the part that is braided? And again, that was a machlokas, Arba etzbos, it's 4 etzbos according to Beis Shammai. V'shalosh Beis Hillel, and the 3 etzbos of Beis Hillel should take kol etzba achas me'arba betefach shaladim. Every etzba is measured as a quarter of a tefach, which is a fistful. Dahainu midas godel, which is essentially the measure of the thumb. V'shis bekatana would be 6 of the pinky finger. And Rashi continues that betilsa, again with literally the 3rd finger referring to the index finger, etzba, that's the index finger, Rashi says it would be 5 of those. V'kulan mida achas, all of these end up being the same measure, it's just different ways of measuring a tefach. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Huna says, Dalid besoch dalid and meshuleshes dalid, with regards to the strings of the tzitzis, there should be 4 strings, that's like Beis Shammai above, and besoch dalid means they should be within 4 etzbos of the corner of the garment, umeshuleshes dalid means they should hang down 4 etzbos, the loose threads should be 4 etzbos long, and that part is also like Beis Shammai. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Gimel, there should be 3 threads, that's like Beis Hillel above, besoch Gimel, they should be within 3 etzbos of the corner of the garment, and then mishuleshes gimel, they should hang down 3 etzbos. That mishuleshes gimel follows Beis Hillel above. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Papa says, Hilchas of the halacha is dalid, it should be 4 strings, again that's like Beis Shammai above, besoch shalosh, it should be within 3 etzbos of the corner of the garment, and then mishuleshes arba, it should hang down 4 etzbos, and again mishuleshes arba is following Beis Shammai above. And Rashi explains, Arba chutin nasan bechor hatalis v'koflon l'shmona. 4 strings should be put in the hole of the talis and they're folded over to make 8. Mishuleshes means teluya ha'anaf levad min hagdil. Again, that's the part that's hanging aside from the braided part. And Arba etzbos, that's 4 etzbos as we said. And Rashi explains, Arba chutin besoch Arba etzbos. Again, 4 strings within 4 etzbos of the corner, meaning shalo yarchik min hasafa. It shouldn't be distant from the edge of the garment. Yoser me Arba etzbos, more than 4 etzbos. And the Gemara continues and asks, L'meimra de'islu shira, does this mean to say that there is a minimum shear for tzitzis? Uraminu, we have a contradiction from the following brisa. Tzitzis, what is the word tzitzis? Ein tzitzis ela yotze. Tzitzis simply means yotze, that it's hanging from the garment. V'ein tzitzis ela mashu, and tzitzis means any amount. There is no minimum amount. Uchvar olu ziknei beis Shammai v'ziknei beis Hillel, la'aliyas Yochanan ben Beseira. Already the elders of Beis Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel, they went to the upper floor, the attic of Yochanan ben Beseira, and they said, tzitzis ein lo shir, there is no shear when it comes to tzitzis, there's no measure. Kayotze bo, and similarly, lulav ein bo shir, there's no measure when it comes to lulav. And the Gemara says, my lav, is it not? What is the meaning of ein lo shir? It means ein lo shir klal, there's no measure at all, there's no minimum measure as well. And the Gemara continues and says, lo, no, that is not what it means. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph.